On that fateful morning of the 18th of April in the year 1942, the deck of the USS Hornet gleamed with ocean spray, trembling under the heavy load of planes that had no right to be there. 16 B-29 bombers hunkered down on the carrier like massive creatures squeezed into a tight space, their wings reaching out over sailors who stared in a blend of wonder and doubt. The air carried a salty bite, the horizon loomed gray with an approaching storm, and every onlooker knew they were witnessing an event that defied all odds. Army bombers aboard a Navy vessel. It was an unlikely union forged from sheer necessity. This raid, in truth, was one that logic said could never happen. Just months before, Pearl Harbor had been engulfed in fire, leaving the United States reeling and wounded, struggling to rise again. The Japanese Empire surged across the Pacific like an unstoppable wave, its forces pushing forward in the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. The American people craved a turning point, something to lift their spirits even if it didn't shift the battles. President Franklin Roosevelt grasped this need deeply. He yearned to bring fear to Japan's own shores, to show the world that America could not only withstand a strike, but respond with bold creativity. That's when Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle stepped in, a pilot famed for shattering aviation records and challenging limits with his boundless drive. He was tasked with the impossible: launch medium bombers from a carrier and strike the Japanese heartland. He agreed without a second thought, despite the plan being held together more by optimism than solid strategy. Preparations raced forward with careful haste. The bombers were lightened by removing extra weight, armor plates stripped away, real guns swapped for black-painted broomsticks to fool enemy eyes, and fuel tanks stuffed into every available spot. Pilots practiced on runways far too short, mastering how to lift those heavy machines into the sky in just a few hundred feet. Each crew member heard the stark truth: this was a one-way journey. China offered a hoped-for refuge, but survival seemed slim for all. They avoided talk of death, yet it hovered like an unspoken shadow in every exchange. Doolittle moved among his teams with a reassuring smile and a firm grip on shoulders, though his gaze revealed the enormous risk. This was a bet with stakes beyond measure. As dawn broke on the 18th of April, the odds sharpened. Japanese patrol boats spotted the fleet hundreds of miles from the planned launch point. Signals raced to Tokyo, forcing Admiral William Halsey to act. The bombers had to take off immediately, much farther out than intended. That meant crossing more than 600 miles of open sea with fuel already pushed to the limit. Doolittle took the news steadily. "We'll go anyway," he declared. His crew boarded their plane, engines growling to life, propellers slicing through the fog. The deck pitched beneath them, sailors braced against the rush of air. One by one, the B-25s fought their way upward, tails brushing the waves before climbing into the gusts. The sight left even seasoned sailors in awe, cheers mixed with tears, as if they'd seen a miracle teetering on disaster's edge. Hours passed, and the miracle reached Japanese land. The bombers swept over Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe, releasing incendiary devices and explosive loads on fuel storage, plants, and military sites. The physical damage was limited, but the impact echoed hugely. For the first time, Japanese people gazed up and spotted American aircraft where none should exist. It shattered their sense of safety. Smoke rose over the capital, sirens screamed in shock. Papers rushed to make sense of the unthinkable, while leaders raged in anger. The empire felt a sting, not just in its defenses, but in its pride. For the raiders, the thrill of the drop quickly faded into the dread of escape. They pressed on as fuel needles dropped, clouds gathering thickly. Darkness fell as they neared China's coast, with mountains hidden in the night. Some planes crash-landed in open fields. Others saw crews parachuting into chilly, windswept heights. Local villagers discovered chutes caught in branches, pilots battered and dazed on the ground. A few found aid from Chinese fighters who braved danger to hide the Americans from enemy scouts. Others fell into less lucky hands, captured by troops offering no pity. Doolittle himself dropped into a muddy rice field, certain the mission had failed. Only later would he discover how it had boosted American spirits beyond imagination. In that instant, soaked in the muck, he carried only the burden of defeat. News of the raid sparked excitement in Washington. Front pages proclaimed Tokyo bombed, and people grasped at this spark of hope. Roosevelt, with a sly smile, claimed the planes flew from Shangri-La, a made-up paradise, to keep the Navy's part secret. Kids in quiet towns played with paper planes, dreaming of those brave flyers who had hit the foe's core. To Japan, the raid meant fury and shame. Commanders seethed that such an insult could occur, directing revenge not just at the pilots, but at Chinese villages that helped them. Brutal reprisals swept through Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces, wiping out whole communities. The raid's mark was drawn in newsprint and in bloodshed. The raiders' fates scattered across fortune's harsh range. Most slipped away from capture, eventually reaching friendly lines. But 8 were taken by the Japanese and pulled into imprisonment. Bound and battered, they faced a sham trial as war criminals for hitting civilian areas. A bitter twist considering Japan's own ruins in Shanghai and Nanjing. For these 8, the thunderous start of their mission faded into the quiet of cell walls. The world learned their full tale only long afterward. So ended the opening chapter of America's aerial payback, laced with edges as keen as fragments. A venture that reason deemed doomed had pierced an enemy's soul. A bold risk raised spirits at home, yet demanded a heavy toll in Asia. Amid the cheers of bravery, 8 young men lingered in cages, their paths hanging on an enraged empire's mercy. The raid showed America could touch Japan, but it also posed a weighty query, denser than rising smoke. How would the United States reply when its own were branded not as fighters, but as outlaws? The response, when it arrived, would shadow the heavens with far more than 16 planes. It would call forth a fleet. The prison walls dripped with damp mold, the air heavy with the sour stench of spoiled rice. 8 young Americans huddled in cells barely wider than a man's arm span, their uniforms ripped, wrists chafed raw by coarse ropes. These were the ones who had made it through the improbable raid, men who had soared across the Pacific in planes that defied gravity, now reduced to faint outlines behind bamboo barriers. Their names, Hallmark, Farrow, Spatz, Mater, Nielsen, Haidt, Barr, and DeShazer, echoed in tense meetings back in Washington. But in this corner of occupied China, they were mere prizes, symbols that Japan's wounded pride could be soothed through shattered captives. Guards doled out cruelty with a detached showmanship. Beatings struck without notice. Water came in precious drips, and any hint of resistance met with punches or the slam of a gunstock. Each man held onto fragments of the past, a mother's warm smile, a lover's final note, the steady hum of an engine far above. Dean Hallmark, steady even in bonds, hummed old hymns through bloodied lips to buoy the group. Bill Farrow, lean and fidgety, filled the quiet with tales of home, green baseball diamonds, fizzy sodas, things that felt like distant fantasies now. Harold Spatz, soft-spoken and devout, murmured prayers with bowed head. Robert Mater, weakened by fever and starvation, faded in and out of awareness, his vitality draining away like sand. They had taken off with bold spirit, now their bravery showed in withstanding emptiness and shame. The so-called trial was nothing but a scripted display for a seething empire. Officers in sharp uniforms recited accusations in flat voices. The charges? Bombing innocent lives, waging an inhumane war. The hypocrisy choked the air. Japan had razed Shanghai, scorched Nanjing, pummeled Manila. Yet they posed as judges of righteousness. The Americans got no true chance to defend themselves, no advocate to argue their case. Words were cut off, appeals lost under the hammer of revenge. For those in the courtroom, the guilty verdict hung in the atmosphere before anyone spoke. The punishment crashed down like a locked gate. 3 sentenced to die, the rest spared but locked away without end. Hallmark, Faro, and Spatz, names destined for memorials, were led off as 3 shaken souls under watch. They begged for day, paper, and ink, and though given reluctantly, it seemed the captors relished the drama of last messages. Smuggled letters reached families months later, penned with surprising poise. Faro assured his mother he was prepared to face the divine. Hallmark asked his kin to stay resilient and recall him in better days. Spatz shared his regret at departing so early, yet his belief guided him to serenity. Every line, scrawled under armed eyes, blended goodbye with quiet rebellion. On the 14th of October in 1942, the 3 were herded to a clearing near Shanghai. Blindfolds tied, they were fastened to stakes and executed by rifle fire. The shots rang through the woods, followed by a rushing hush. Bodies were hastily interred, the event shrouded in secrecy. For months, loved ones in America nurtured fragile hopes, unaware their boys rested under alien earth. The Japanese thought they'd set a stern example, a caution to America that more strikes would reap lives. Instead, they'd ignited a spark beyond their grasp. The remaining men wasted away in cells for years. Robert Mader's body gave out to illness, slipping away in December of 1943, leaving 7 raiders behind. Jacob DeShazer, once fiery and sharp-tongued as a bombardier, grew bitter at first, but eventually discovered comfort in the faith he'd once dismissed. Chase Nielsen and the others bore whippings, grueling treks, and mind-bending questionings meant to crush spirit and flesh. They scraped by on rice bits, eyes sunken, bones stark against skin. Every dawn was a bet on seeing dusk, but enduring became their triumph. Word of the killings seeped through coded wires and hushed talks in the United States. Officials held back the facts, wary of stirring rage while sons battled on in the Pacific. But post-war revelations hit like a fresh wound. Mothers read confirmations of sons gunned down like villains. Partners who had cherished promise rings wept alone. The raid that sparked national pride had etched pain into many homes, scars unseen, yet as profound as any frontline scar. Still, the losses fueled determination. In Washington, the ends of Hallmark, Faro, and Spatz were seen not as warnings, but as calls to arms. Japan aimed to cow America into retreat. It stirred the reverse. Strategists plotted in terse tones about ramping up, shifting from bold symbols to crushing might. Roosevelt, upon hearing, tightened his expression and vowed, "They won't have perished without purpose." Those words would soon ride in bomb holes vast enough to eclipse the sun. To the Japanese, the killing stood as rightful judgment, a boast that even powerful America bent to their rules. But doubts bubbled underneath. Some commanders wondered if slaying prisoners was prudent if it courted a backlash too immense. In Tokyo's halls, such worries were stifled by bold talk, but time would reveal their foresight. The empire had struck in wrath, trapping itself in an inescapable bind. The freed raiders, thin and scarred, emerged in 1945 as American winds swept the Pacific. Images from then show figures almost unrecognizable, gazes deep-set, frames frail, yet breathing. Their accounts later exposed the savagery of their ordeal, the farce of the hearing, the terror of the shootings. They came back to cheers as champions, but cell shadows clung forever. DeShazer turned to spreading mercy, even visiting Japan to share tales of redemption, while others bore subtler wounds into old age. Their experiences wove into war's broader tale, evidence of its tolls and how brutality warps paths. But in 1942, none of that had unfolded. What rang clear in the quiet after Shanghai's gunfire was Japan's irreversible step. 3 lay in shallow pits. 1 faded in confinement, and 4 suffered torments beyond thought. The Doolittle mission, born as a proud jab across waves, had darkened into a debt of blood, one etched deep. And such debts demand reckoning. America would settle it not with 3 aircraft nor 16, but with a storm of flame poised to erupt. Factories across America burned the midnight oil. Sparks flew from welders' flames, machines thundered like trapped animals, and production belts pulsed with unyielding beat. The nation had molded its huge industrial strength into a war beast, churning out metal and gas, wings and motors, until the atmosphere quivered with raw power. The fallen Doolittle men were seared into collective recall like sacred text, and though no loud cry for payback rang out, each bolt driven into metal, each B-29 emerging from the line, bore their sacrifices echo. War's replies would no longer whisper, they would roar in flames. The B-29 Superfortress stood apart from all before it, a colossal hunter with wings spanning wider than a street. Its hold could ferry destruction overseas. Those who first laid hands on it called it majestic yet fearsome, a tool of deliverance for allies and doom for foes. It soared above Japanese interceptors, cut through Pacific gales with speed, and hauled loads that made the old B-25s seem like toys. Its creation signaled America's shift from risky feats to sheer command. General Curtis LeMay took charge of this aerial shift, sturdy, direct, often with a cigar gripped firm. He brooked no delays or soft hearts. His troops nicknamed him for his tough stance, but behind the bark lay a sharp intellect viewing battle as calculated ruin. In early 1944 strikes, LeMay pushed for pinpoint hits on Japanese works, dispatching B-29s to hammer plants and docks from cloud heights. But outcomes fell short. High winds scattered groups, bombs hit fields instead of forges, and mists often veiled marks. U.S. tolls climbed. Doubters murmured that even this giant might not force Japan's yield. LeMay's fix was drastic and harsh. He had bombers shed most, weapons slimmed for heavier loads, and flown low under winds in night's cover. Their freight switched to fire starters, bundles meant to torch timber towns like dry brush. The reasoning cut deep. Japan's fight relied not just on mills, but on homes where pieces were handmade. Raze the towns, cripple the effort. On the 9th of March in 1945, the trial ignited. Over 300 B-29s thundered above Tokyo, unleashing rivers of flame. The metropolis turned to a blaze. Winds fanned fires into tempests that devoured all. Roads melted, waters steamed, air itself deadly. In one evening, nearly 100,000 lives ended, men, women, young ones reduced to dust. Those who lived through it described paths flowing with liquid steel, forms heaped by waterways, a heaven's crimson like an infernal gate. For the flyers overhead, the view mixed victory with horror. One crewman noted Tokyo's shine visible from 150 miles, like a dawn born of crimson. Some hailed it as the knockout punch. Others flew back mute, troubled by thoughts of families caught below. LeMay dismissed qualms with a fighter's chill logic. End enough, and they quit. It was reasoning hard as iron, and in war's math, it held. Tokyo's inferno sparked a chain. Nights on end, B-29s swarmed over Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, and scores of lesser spots. By midsummer, more than 60% of Japan's cityscapes lay wasted. Wanderers picked through debris, holding little ones, hacking on clinging fumes. Fields became tent homes, shrines turned aid posts. An empire once crowing over slain American captives, as Might's proof now saw metropolises vanish in moments. Leaders vowed defiance aloud, but in shadows, some admitted defeat loomed. Through this wreck, the lost raiders' echo lingered like a specter. To their living brothers, each flight held unresolved weight, as if engines hummed with Hallmark faro, spats, and Medeiros tones. Homeside families scanned raid reports, sensing private justice for their gone. But payback twisted complex, each blaze sharpened queries. When does enough become too much? When does right turn to excess? Such whispers in quiet halls and bunks found no simple reply. War seldom offers them. Yet the assaults only grew fiercer. By the middle of 1945, the scope defied belief. More than 20,000 bombers had taken to the skies against Japan, their cargoes not mere tons, but vast heaps of destruction. Each mission deepened the riddle. America, which had entered the fray with a desperate show of courage, now ruled the heavens. Its resources appeared boundless, its will unyielding. To those on Japanese streets, the drone of approaching aircraft wasn't just noise. It was a verdict, a stark reminder that the conflict they deemed honorable now brought horror to their doorsteps. Even as urban centers blazed and lives vanished by the thousands each night, Japan's rulers gripped illusions of persistence. Some officials clung to notions of wearing down invaders for a bargain. Others pinned hopes on outside brokers like the Soviets. But week by week, the heavens filled with more American wings, and the blazes climbed higher. The nation that had aimed to intimidate with the deaths of 3 captured flyers now gazed into a chasm illuminated by 10,000 machines. Among the U.S. flyers, exhaustion blended with a somber satisfaction. In notes sent home, they described the eerie glow of burning towns like streams of light from above. A few cracked grim jokes about turning the land into one massive grill. Laughter served as armor, a fragile guard against the scale of their actions. But in still moments post-flight, many voiced inner turmoil. Could such vast ruin ever count as true success? By July, Japan stood as a shattered land, defiant no more in spirit. The strikes had gutted its hubs, halted production, and displaced millions. Still, no white flag waved. American heads grappled with a grim puzzle. If 20,000 bombers hadn't broken them, what could? The solution lurked in remote sands, behind secured barriers and secret labels. For all the infernos the superfortresses had sparked, a fiercer blaze, brighter, hotter, ultimate, prepared to claim the air. Dawn broke over Hiroshima, much like any warm August day in 1945, golden, soft, and misleadingly kind. Youngsters headed to classes with books in hand. Mothers queued for scarce water, laborers pedaled toward depleted workshops. The sky stretched a flawless blue, as if untouched by conflict's shadow. No eyes caught the lone B-29 wheeling far up, a tiny gleam in the expanse, its hold bearing not flames or iron, but an invention utterly novel. At 8:15 in the morning, everything shifted. A glare outshining the sun ripped across the town. Outlines scorched into stone, skin vaporized to nothing. The shock raced outward, flattening structures, flinging forms, birthing a tempest so wild that streams seethed and breath itself poisoned. In that heartbeat, tens of thousands faded away, and Hiroshima etched itself as a term of hushed terror. 3 days on, Nagasaki met the same fate. Another horizon, another burst, another place turned to cinders. At last, Tokyo's elite could no longer ignore the tide. Japan, already hobbled by endless fire raids, confronted a force defying grasp. The emperor, revered as sacred yet worn by burdens, taped a yield that mentioned this fresh, merciless device and the call to bear the unbearable. For the first empire's span, Japan knelt in loss. The struggle ignited by ambush at Pearl Harbor and countered by daring over Tokyo, closed in the hush of vanished streets. But beneath victory's bold strokes hid subtler threads, linking back to that April in 1942 when 16 craft had scraped skyward from the Hornet's deck. The enduring Doolittle men, drawn and wide-eyed from long captivity, stepped free from cells. Jacob DeShazer emerged battered in frame but renewed in soul, embracing beliefs that swapped grudge for grace. Chase Nielsen, reserved and poised, wore marks that time couldn't erase. Their lost brothers, Hallmark, Faro, Spatz, and Mater, stayed behind, but their essence flew with every Pacific Crossing bomber since. In ways, their killings had sparked a chain ending in Hiroshima's stark blaze. For the airmen of 1945's grand pushes, triumph carried a bitter edge. Correspondents spoke of honor, certainly, but also disquiet. One aviator likened Nagoya's fire to peering into an open pit of damnation. Another owned up to prayers haunted by visions of fleeing youth amid flames. They weren't thinkers by trade, yet they sensed war had reached a point of no return, a call for ethical tally. In Japan, those who outlasted wandered ruins and quiet. A child named Sadako roamed debris, seeking kin, tiny fingers gripping a singed uniform scrap. An elder hunched by his home's dark skeleton, swaying, murmuring names, silenced forever. Clerics sounded fractured bells over ashen expanses, their notes dulled by haze. These scenes, relayed in dispatches and later fixed in images, compelled the globe to face revenge's full price. Japan had tried to cow America by slaying detained flyers. America answered by unveiling terror's true face from above. The twist cut deep and without mercy. Those branded as offenders for scattering a few loads over Tokyo were gone. Their homeland, though, had unleashed hundreds of thousands more, peaking in two blasts unmatched. History's ledger tallied not in court debates, but in remains and wreckage. From those wastes, though, an unforeseen shift arose. Hiroshima and Nagasaki's scarred spoke of mourning, yes, but also peace's urgency, to spare any place such fury again. In America, some once light-hearted raiders pushed against atomic threats. Even Curtis LeMay, builder of ruin, conceded later that defeat might have seen him judged a villain. The divide between fair play and reprisal, ever hazy, vanished in nuclear glare. Yet one fact shone through the haze. Minor brutalities can birth tempests unimagined. The three pilots' deaths in 1942 aimed as a stern lesson of Japanese might. They seeded instead a holocaust that ate their towns. What started as 16 planes emblem grew to 20,000 bombers onslaught. What began with sparse explosives closed in dual bursts that rattled the era's core. Survivors didn't miss the moral, some as vindication, others warning, more as unspeakable woe. In later times, Doolittle's crew reunited, lifting engraved chalices, honoring the missing. Annually, fewer toasts rang, more cups turned down in tribute. Their saga, from hidden op to celebrated myth, stood as lore. They'd witnessed their bold strike recalled not just for grit, but as the ember igniting history's deadliest air campaign. Pride and regret mingled, but all knew fate had tied them to flames. Thus war's closing scene faded not in cheers, but stillness, stillness of leveled towns, of late freed captives, of chimes over cinder fields. The hush after storm when echoes linger and pulses race. For all, that quiet bore a query. If 3 deaths swelled to 20,000 wings of wrath, what seeds might sprout from Hiroshima and Nagasaki's tools? A puzzle to shadow ages, murmured when shadows fall with feathers.